at New York's Algonquin Hotel identified Murphy as one of the men who had pistol-whipped him during a holdup. The next day, the husband of actress Eva Gabor identified Murphy and Kuhn as the men who had beaten his wife and stolen $50,000 worth of her jewelry. These additional charges against the trio were the result of exhaustive research by prosecutor Maurice Najari, then an assistant district attorney with the New York DA's office. Najari is now semi-retired from private practice.
My feeling was that these free spirits could not tolerate jail time, and that if I could get them in a jail, I could crack them and find a solution to the crime. Not only a conviction of these three defendants, there was an ancillary problem as well. I wanted to recover the gems for the museum. I wanted to bring them back where they belong, to that museum and to the people of this city.
Najari's plan worked. With the new testimony, bail was now set at $150,000 each, money the robbers simply couldn't raise. Suddenly behind bars and facing a possible prison sentence of more than 30 years, Alan Kuhn held a conference with his fellow burglars that same day. The three decided that the time had come to cooperate. Kuhn agreed to fly back to Miami with Najari and locate the missing stones. Unfortunately, the judge who had just raised the bail refused to release Kuhn to the assistant DA's custody. So, according to court procedure, Najari and his detectives were supposed to return Kuhn to the court's jail wing.
Instead, I said to the detectives, I've got another idea. We're not going to bring him back. There's nothing wrong with our questioning him, which happens quite often with a witness or a defendant who wants to speak to us. We'll question him overnight. We'll return him to the prison tomorrow morning, because he had told us that if we go to Miami tonight, we'll have the gems by tomorrow morning. And consequently, I took him from the witness room to my office to the airport, and I kidnapped him.
Najari and his detectives flew to Miami that night with Kuhn. Not surprisingly, after one night, the robber had not recovered the gems. Kuhn's hunt for the treasure among his network of Miami connections led through a maze of bars, restaurants, and hotels. And the whole time, the team was pursued by dozens of reporters. At one point, the assistant district attorney even put on goggles and fins to check an underwater location. But all he got was wet. Finally, at 3 in the morning on January 8th, an informer said he knew where the jewels were now hidden. Hotly pursued by the pack of press, the search party raced to the Trailways bus terminal. There, in locker 911, were the Star of India and 8 other gems in 2 brown suede pouches. The bags were wet and looked as though they had been hidden in the sea, but the water soaking them was not salty. With half of the stolen jewels recovered, all 3 of the thieves quickly pleaded guilty to robbing the American Museum of Natural History. The New York DA now offered to ask for only a year in prison if they turned over the rest of the haul, but they had long ago sold them to pay for their substantial legal fees. Maurice Najari, who prosecuted the case, says that the missing gems included the famous Eagle Diamond.
The Eagle Diamond, although it was a large diamond, was not very valuable in and of itself. Its value laid in the fact that it was found in a minefield in Wisconsin. Wisconsin was not known for a diamond area, so that its rarity is what created its value. That diamond was eventually, I think, broken down and sold, as were the remainder of those diamonds.
In the end, they each got 3 consecutive one-year sentences. By the time they were sentenced, the DeLong ruby had been acquired by a Miami gangster who offered it to millionaire John D. MacArthur for a $25,000 ransom. Nominated as go-between was the writer Francis Amstel. He collected the money and left it, as instructed, in a local phone booth where the phone was ringing. When he answered, he was told that the jewel had been hidden in another booth above the door. He found it there and passed it over to a jeweler who was standing by to identify it as the genuine article. John MacArthur was acclaimed as a benefactor, although controversy over the ethics of the deal soon followed. Many felt that paying a ransom would encourage other thefts. Whatever the ethics, the museum was ecstatic over the return of the jewels. Officials accepted that they'd never get the smaller stones back, but there was palpable relief that the Star of India, the DeLong Star Ruby, and other recovered stones could now go back on display. As for the Hall of Gems, new precautions would now be taken.
Well, this is a specially designed case that is actually a safe. It was built originally for the Hope Diamond when we had it here a number of years ago. And it's a very secure, sturdy, regular safe with a steel door that comes down over the glass top to lock it up at nighttime.
The Star of India, with its domed head left uncut to enhance its natural 6 rays, was mined in Ceylon in the 17th century and acquired by the American banker J.P. Morgan, who gave it to the museum in the 1920s. After its theft and return made it famous once again, 5,000 visitors flocked to see it in one day. Meanwhile, the 3 robbers served almost 2 years of their sentence and were quietly paroled. Alan Kuhn and Roger Clark slipped from sight, but Murph the Surf kept showing up in the spotlight. He and Kuhn had escaped trial for robbing and harming actress Eva Gabor because she was too busy in Hollywood to come to New York. Murphy then went to Los Angeles himself, where he was soon arrested in connection with several jewel heists. But the evidence was insufficient, so he was allowed to go free. Soon after returning to Florida, he was again arrested. In 1968, he joined in a violent robbery attempt at the home of millionairess Olivia Wofford. As the robbers forced her to open her safe, Wofford set off a secret alarm and the gang was caught. Murphy attempted to escape by leaping through a plate glass window, but he was apprehended and badly cut by the shattered glass. He had to be bandaged at the local hospital before being taken to the police station for booking. His lawyer argued that he was incapable of understanding right from wrong, and a psychiatrist said Murphy believed he was a modern Robin Hood. Whatever motivated Murphy, this time it was clear that he didn't like the cameras and publicity as much as he had in 1964. The bloody climax to Jack Murphy's criminal career came in 1969, when he was arrested for murder in the parking lot of Valenti's restaurant in Miami. At the time of his arrest, he was out on bail awaiting trial for the Wofford burglary.
Whether a guy is violent or not is not the criteria as to whether you set bail on him. The criteria is, will he return to court again? And Murphy was smart enough to know that each time he was required in court, he returned. So he was a good bail risk. The mere fact that you would recite to a court that he was violent, you wanted additional bail on him, that wasn't adequate. You had to prove to the court that he was unlikely to return to the jurisdiction. I suppose in later years, those prosecutors were unable to prove that, could not get sufficiently high bail.
Murphy and a partner, Jack Griffith, were accused of persuading 2 secretaries at a Los Angeles bank to walk off with $500,000 in securities. Soon afterwards, the bodies of the 2 girls were found weighed down with concrete blocks and dumped in a drainage canal called Whiskey Creek near Fort Lauderdale. Found guilty of murder, Murphy and Griffith were sentenced to life imprisonment. But Murphy appealed on grounds of insanity and was committed to a maximum security mental hospital. 16 years later, in 1985, Murphy had a new but acceptable obsession. He believed he was put on the earth to preach God's word. Apparently cured, Jack Murphy left the hospital for a rehabilitation center. Fellow prisoners sang hymns to bid him Godspeed, and the former playboy and jewel thief showed that he still knew how to handle media attention, as he claimed to be totally reformed.
God has used this system and this experience to help me get my priorities and my life straightened out.
Murphy had worked hard counseling other prisoners. He was granted parole for life in 1986. The officer who arrested him was not convinced that Murphy had been thoroughly reformed.
Knowing what I know of him, I just can't bring myself to believe all these things he's saying now.
Murphy himself had no such doubts.
There was many times I didn't believe that I would ever walk out of prison again. But God has a sense of humor and a timing and a style of his own, and apparently he has something for me to do.